I never thought my own son would be the one to look me in the eyes and tell me I didn't belong in my own house. Yet there I was, standing on the front porch just after midnight, staring at the faint light coming from the living room window. My house, the place where my late wife and I built a life together, brick by brick, memory by memory. But that night, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Inside, I could still hear their muffled laughter, Lisa's high-pitched, fake sweet giggle, and her mother, Patricia's voice, dripping with condescension. My son Daniel was in there too. My Daniel, the same boy I had worked double shifts for, raised on my own after his mother passed. The same boy who used to fall asleep on my chest as a toddler. And now he had let them push me out like some unwanted guest. I gripped the railing, my hands cold against the iron. Just a few hours earlier, Daniel had said the words that broke something inside me. Dad, it's time for you to find your own place. We need space. Find my own place. This was my place. The deed, the blood, the sweat, all mine. I built this house 35 years ago with the woman I loved more than anything in this world. And now my son wanted me gone because it was more comfortable for his wife and her mother. For a moment, the humiliation burned through me like fire, but beneath it, something else stirred, something sharper, colder. I wasn't just going to walk away from everything I'd built. Not for them, not like this. I straightened my back and stared through the window at the shadows moving inside. They thought they'd won. They thought the old man would just quietly pack his bags. They were wrong. But let me start from the beginning. When my wife Margaret passed away 5 years ago, the house felt too quiet at first. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill the rooms, it sinks into your bones. But over time, I grew used to it. I spent my mornings on the porch with black coffee, listening to the birds. I tended to this small rose garden she loved so much. Every room held a piece of her, and in a way, that kept me grounded. It wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was a familiar one. Daniel had always been my pride. He was 33 now, a good kid, smart, and with a kind heart. When he met Lisa, I was genuinely happy for him. She was charming at first, a bright smile, soft voice, always polite when she came to dinner. I remember thinking, maybe Margaret would have liked her. Daniel seemed in love, and I wanted nothing more than to see him happy. After they got married, things started to change slowly, almost invisibly. Daniel called less often. He said they were busy settling into their lives. Fair enough. But then one afternoon, he showed up at my door with Lisa by his side. He looked nervous. She looked rehearsed. Dad, he said, Lisa and we're in a bit of a tough spot financially. The rent went up. I was wondering if we could stay here for a while, just until we get back on our feet. Of course, I said yes. How could I not? It was Daniel. I told him they could stay as long as they needed. Margaret would have wanted that too. Family comes first. That was always our rule. The first few weeks went smoothly. Lisa cooked sometimes, and Daniel helped me fix the porch steps. We'd have dinner together at the big oak table. But little by little, I began to notice small changes. Lisa started reorganizing the kitchen, my kitchen claiming it was more practical her way. She moved Margaret's old ceramic jar collection from the counter to a box in the basement. Less clutter, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I told myself it wasn't worth making a scene. I wanted Daniel to feel at home, so I let it slide. That was my first mistake. 2 months later, Lisa's mother, Patricia, came for a short visit. She was a tall, sharp-tongued woman with a habit of making every sentence sound like an insult dressed as advice. "What a quaint house," she said the first time she walked in, her eyes scanning the living room like a real estate agent. But with a few changes, it could feel less old. I forced a smile. "It's held up fine for 35 years, I replied. She chuckled. "The way people do when they think they're smarter than you. I'm sure it has." I assumed she'd stay for a week, 2, maybe, but then she never left. No explanation, no question, she just stayed. Her suitcase was parked in the guest room, as if it had grown roots. Lisa called it temporary. But they started buying furniture, their furniture, and putting it around my house. The disrespect came in drops at first. A comment here, a gesture there. Patricia would forget to tell me when they invited guests over. Lisa would correct me on how to arrange the living room, as if the years I spent there didn't count. Daniel, he said nothing. He always looked torn, but his silence was an answer on its own. One night, I came home from my evening walk to find Patricia sitting in my recliner, the one I'd bought with Margaret after our 10th anniversary. She was sipping tea, feet up, as if it belonged to her. "Hope you don't mind," she said casually. I did, but I just nodded and went to my room. That was the second mistake. As weeks turned into months, Lisa grew bolder. She'd speak to me in a tone that made it sound like I was the guest. One evening, she even said, we were thinking of repainting the dining room. Something brighter, more modern. That word stung. It wasn't her house to decide anything. I tried to reason with Daniel later that night. Son, I said softly, this house has a history. Your mother and I built every corner of it. I don't want to lose that. He looked uncomfortable. Lisa just wants to make it feel more like home, Dad, that's all. More like home. As if it wasn't already home. Patricia made things worse. She'd make backhanded remarks about how nice it must be to have this house all to yourself, or how lucky Daniel is to have a father who provides so well. The subtext was clear. She didn't see me as the owner anymore. She saw me as an old man taking up space. There were moments when I almost confronted them, when the lump in my throat burned too much to swallow. But then I'd see Daniel's tired eyes, and I'd hear Margaret's voice in my head. Family comes first, Henry. Always. So I bit my tongue. I told myself it would get better. But at DIDN single quotes T. One evening, I found Patricia rearranging Margaret's photo wall, our wedding photo, Daniel's baby pictures, the frame from our last Christmas together. She said it was too busy and depressing. I went upstairs and closed my door. But that night, sitting in the darkness, I thought to myself, I should have seen the signs, because by the time I finally did, it was already too late to pretend this was still my home. It had slowly become theirs, or so they thought. The day everything snapped didn't come with a storm. It came with sunshine, chirping birds, and the faint smell of Lisa's perfume in the hallway, a scent I had come to associate with tension. It was a Saturday morning in late June. I remember because the roses Margaret planted were in full bloom. They always were around her birthday. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when I heard voices in the living room. Not the usual chatter, low, urgent voices, Lisa's sharp whisper, Patricia's smug drawl, and Daniel's uncertain tone. It was a familiar mix by now. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but the door wasn't fully closed. He's old, Daniel. He doesn't need this big house anymore, Patricia was saying. Matt, you have a family to think about now. Lisa chimed in softly. But with that cutting edge, I'd learned to recognize, exactly, it's not like he's going to be here forever. We could finally make it our home. I froze. Our home. Then Daniel's voice came, quieter, hesitant. I don't know, Mom. It's still his house. It's our future. Lisa interrupted him. You want kids, right? You said yourself this house is too big for one man. And honestly, she lowered her voice even more, he's not exactly making it easy to feel welcome here. My chest tightened. I'd paid for every brick of this house. I'd mowed every inch of that lawn, replaced every shingle on the roof after storms. And now I was being discussed like a piece of old furniture. They were planning to move out. Patricia delivered the final blow in her honeyed tone. Daniel, you need to step up. You're the man of the house now. Those words, they stung deeper than I expected. Man of the house. I had carried that role my entire adult life, and now it was being handed off like a spare set of keys. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and walked in. The conversation died instantly. Lisa gave me that practiced sweet smile. Patricia didn't even bother pretending. Daniel just looked guilty. Morning, I said, keeping my voice steady. Coffee's hot if anyone wants. Nobody moved. I sat in my chair, and sipped the bitter liquid, even though it suddenly tasted different. Patricia glanced at Lisa, then back at Daniel. Maybe, she said with a sly grin, this is a good time. That was the first sign that something bigger had already been decided. Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, can we talk? His voice cracked just enough to give away how uneasy he was. Of course, I said, even though my gut was twisting into knots. Lisa and Patricia stayed seated, like judges waiting for a verdict they already knew. Daniel took a deep breath. Dad, he began slowly, Lisa and I have been thinking, we love you, but we need our own space, to build our life. I stared at him, trying to keep my voice calm. You already have space. You're living here. He avoided my eyes. Yeah, but it doesn't feel like ours. And with Mom here, he meant Patricia. It's just crowded. Patricia interrupted before I could answer. It's only natural, Henry. Young couples need to build their own home. And honestly, this house isn't suited for a man your age, living alone. You'd be better off in a smaller place, something easier to manage. I clenched my jaw. something easier to manage, as if I was some fragile old man with one foot in the grave. Daniel added, we've been looking at some apartments for you. There's one just 15 minutes away. It's quiet, affordable. I slammed my cup down. Apartments? You're asking me to leave my own house. Silence. Lisa shifted in her seat, looking annoyingly composed. We're not asking, she said softly. We're trying to make this easier for everyone. My hands shook, not from fear, but from anger. My house. I'd built it with Margaret. We'd laughed in these walls, cried in these rooms, watched Daniel grow up here. And now they were treating me like I was an obstacle in their new life. I turned to Daniel. Is this what you want? He looked down. It's for the best. That was it. No hesitation, no fight for me. Just surrender to their manipulation. I stood up slowly. I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son would push me out of my home. Daddy started, but Patricia cut in with that fake, concerned tone. It's not like that, Henry. You'll thank us later. This house needs young energy, fresh life. I felt the air leave my lungs. And I suppose that means mine doesn't count anymore. Lisa folded her hands neatly in her lap. It's just time for change. The humiliation hit me like a wave I couldn't dodge. For a moment, I thought of Margaret. What would she say if she saw this? The boy she adored, turning into someone I barely recognized. I didn't say another word. I just walked out onto the porch, the same porch where I'd stood the night I made my silent promise. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the cup. That night, things escalated even more. Patricia started referring to the house as our place. She even suggested they repaint the entire exterior. Lisa began looking at online decor ideas for their home. And Daniel didn't stop them. 3 days later, Daniel came to my room with a printed brochure for the apartment he'd mentioned. Dad, he said softly, I put down a deposit. You'll love it there. My voice was steady but cold. You what? It's refundable if you don't like it, he said quickly. But this will be good for all of us. Good for you, you mean, I replied. He flinched, but didn't argue. That was when it truly sank in. He wasn't fighting for me because he had already chosen them over me. I looked him in the eyes and asked, do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to leave the house I built, the only home you've ever known, so that your wife and her mother can live here. Daniel didn't meet my gaze. It's complicated. No, I said sharply. It's actually very simple. The final straw came a week later. I returned from grocery shopping to find Patricia in my bedroom. She had boxes on the bed. My bed. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. Don't get upset, she said, as if I was a child throwing a tantrum. Lisa and Daniel thought it would be better if I moved in here. It's bigger. You can take the guest room for now. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stared at her, standing in the space where Margaret and I had shared our lives. Something inside me cracked wide open. I lowered the bags slowly to the floor. Get out. She rolled her eyes. Henry, don't be dramatic. Get out. My voice echoed through the hallway. Lisa came rushing in. Daniel behind her. Dad. Daniel started, raising his hands. Not another word, I said. This ends right now. Patricia scoffed, as if I was nothing but an inconvenience. Lisa wrapped her arm around Daniel, whispering something to calm him down. And Daniel, my son, stood there looking helpless, or maybe just unwilling. I turned to him, the weight of 33 years in my voice. This is the house I built with your mother, and you let them treat it like theirs. You let them treat me like I'm nothing. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. I walked out that night with nothing but my car keys and my dignity hanging by a thread. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the house where I held my wife's hand for the last time, the house where I raised my son. And for the first time, I whispered the truth I had avoided for too long. They don't think you'll fight back, but I would. I had to, because that was the night I decided I wasn't going to be their victim. I was going to be their lesson. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat for hours, staring at the house I'd built with my own 2 hands. I could still picture Margaret sitting on the porch swing, laughing at something silly I said. And now, Patricia was sleeping in our room, as if she'd claimed a piece of my life as her own. Somewhere between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., something in me hardened. I stopped feeling like a victim. I started thinking like a man who had something to reclaim. The first thing I did the next morning was call my old friend Thomas. He'd been my lawyer for over 20 years, and he knew every detail of my will, my deeds, and my finances. He didn't even let me finish explaining before saying, Henry, they don't have a legal leg to stand on. That house is 100% yours. Just hearing that sentence lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Can I legally evict them? I asked. Absolutely, Thomas replied. Lisa and Patricia aren't on the deed, and Daniel never signed anything either. If they won't leave willingly, we'll file for eviction. I'll make sure everything's airtight. I felt a quiet surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. The next step was practical. I went to the bank that afternoon and made sure all accounts related to the house utilities, mortgage, though it was fully paid off, insurance were under my name only. They always had been, but I wanted to double-check every detail. I set up new passwords and two-step verifications for everything. Then, I called a locksmith I trusted and arranged for a lock change on every external door, scheduled to be done the moment the eviction notice was legally filed. If they wanted a war over my house, they were going to fight on my terms and lose. Over the next few days, I quietly began moving my personal valuables out of my bedroom, Margaret's jewelry, our wedding album, important documents, and a few things Daniel probably didn't even remember existed. I rented a small, secure storage unit just outside of town. Every evening, after they were asleep, I made trips to it. I moved silently, like a man preparing for a storm. Meanwhile, I played the part they expected of me, the defeated old man. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make a scene. I smiled at Lisa's fake sweetness, ignored Patricia's smug comments, and even nodded along when Daniel awkwardly asked if I'd thought about the apartment. Inside, though, every smile was a blade I was sharpening. But Thomas and I met twice that week to review the deed and ownership documents. Everything was clear. The house had been solely in my name since the day Margaret and I bought it. I'd never added Daniel to the title. It was a deliberate decision Margaret and I made years ago, to protect him from making foolish decisions with something we'd worked our entire lives for. That decision now felt like the smartest thing we ever did by the 5th day. The eviction notice was drafted and ready to be served. All I had to do was give the word, but I wasn't done. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it cleanly and decisively. No messy yelling. No giving them the satisfaction of seeing me cracked up. So I did something else. I met with a financial advisor and updated my will. I made it very clear, if Daniel allowed them to disrespect me again, everything would bypass him entirely and go to charity. It wasn't a threat. It was insurance. There were moments during this time when doubt crept in. He's still your son. A small voice whispered at night. Do you really want to throw him out with them? And every time I thought of backing down, I remembered Patricia standing in my bedroom, calling me dramatic. I remembered Lisa saying it was time for change. And I remembered Daniel's silence. I wasn't the one who turned this into a war. They did. I was just going to finish it, a few days before the notice was served. Lisa mentioned at breakfast, we were thinking of starting the renovations soon. Maybe we'll tear out that old porch. I looked at her and smiled. Oh, I think you'll be moving sooner than that. She blinked. What? Nothing, I said lightly, and took a sip of my coffee. Inside, I was counting down the hours. On the morning of July 2nd, I signed the final eviction documents at Thomas's office. The sheriff would serve them within 48 hours. My locks would be changed the same day. Their little fantasy was about to come crashing down. I knew I had to be smart about this, and I had been. The morning the sheriff came felt oddly ordinary. The sun was up, the air smelled like cut grass, and the roses were still wet with dew. I woke at 6 a.m., dressed in the same cardigan I have for Sunday mornings, and drove to Thomas's office for a final coffee and a last look at the paperwork. Thomas handed me the stack eviction notice, certified affidavits, and a clear statement of ownership that left no room for argument. You'll do fine, he said, clapping my shoulder. I nodded, and for the first time since Patricia had moved into my bedroom, I felt a quiet readiness. At 9:15 a.m. on July 4th, the sheriff's deputy and a process server arrived. Thomas wanted to be there, but I insisted on handling it myself. This was my house, and I wanted them to know the man they'd disregarded was the one reclaiming it. The deputy knocked with the kind of authority you can hear in his knuckles. Lisa answered, hair in a messy bun, a coffee cup in hand, and that practiced smile when she saw me that morning. Morning, Henry, she said, voice too bright. Is everything okay? The deputy moved forward. Ma'am, I have legal papers to serve. This is an eviction notice. Lisa's smile faltered. Patricia emerged slowly from the hallway, robe tied tight, eyebrows arched. Daniel was behind her, hollow-eyed, shifting from foot to foot like a man with a headache he couldn't shake. I watched their faces carefully. They were about to realize being cozy in my home came with consequences. "Is this about the apartment deposit?" Daniel asked, voice weak. "No," the deputy said. "This is a notice to vacate. The property owner has filed." Lisa's hand trembled around the mug. "Henry, you can't." I stepped forward and held the papers myself. "You can read it if you like," I said calmly. You should have seen their faces when they read the first line and realized it named me as the plaintiff. The color drained from Lisa's cheeks. Patricia's smug expression slipped into disbelief. Daniel looked like someone who had just had the floor pulled from under him. I watched the panic build like a storm cloud. Patricia immediately tried to speak for them. "There must be some mistake, Henry. Think about what you're doing." "Don't," I said sharply. The word landed with more force than I expected. "Don't tell me how to live in my own house." Patricia's lips tightened. Lisa's voice rose into an accusation. "You're doing this because of me, aren't you? Because I said something. You wouldn't be doing this if I hadn't, if you hadn't." "What?" I asked. "Tried to take over my home." They sputtered. The deputy let them argue for a few minutes, then made a note and explained the timeline. 48 hours to vacate voluntarily. Otherwise, a formal eviction would be scheduled with a court order and the sheriff would return to enforce it. I could see the math forming in their heads, how fast they had to act, which friends might help, what they could salvage. After the deputy left, the house felt charged. Patricia stormed into the kitchen and started packing trifles into shopping bags, snapping orders like a small general. Lisa cried into her hands and paced. Daniel retreated to the study and slammed doors. They were scrambling, and it felt like watching someone run on a treadmill that had suddenly been turned on too fast. I had planned for that. Over the past week, I had quietly intercepted their attempts to tie my accounts into joint access. I had secured my safe, pulled any spare keys, updated the insurance, and made the locksmith stand by. When the deputy left, I went to my office and dialed a number I'd saved for months, a private moving service. I'd arranged discreetly to help if push came to shove. I didn't want chaos. I wanted order. That afternoon, while Lisa and Patricia called relatives and sobbed about the injustice, the moving crew arrived. They were professional, efficient, and brisk. I watched as they carried boxes labeled with Lisa's handwriting, kitchen linens, books down the front steps. The sight of their things leaving my porch made my chest tighten and then loosen. People call possessions things, but they are markers of choice, of belonging. Having their markers removed felt like reclaiming the map of my life. When I changed the locks, 6 hours later, I felt a small thrill. The locksmith did it with a respectful nod and handed me the new keys. Thomas had advised holding back any unnecessary spectacle. The point was to be lawful and undeniable. No yelling, no breaking, just the slow, inexorable mechanics of justice. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I heard a scratching at the door. Daniel, with a duffel slung over his shoulder, stood there. His eyes were red. "Dad," he said, voice barely a whisper, "we don't have anywhere else." I messed up. I felt a twinge of what used to be unconditional love. I thought of the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest, the one who learned to ride a bike in the alley, the boy who ate peanut butter with us on rainy days. Reality was a complicated thing. Love doesn't erase an action. "You should have fought for me," I said quietly. "You should have told them no." "I was scared," he admitted. "They said you were being unreasonable. Patricia said you were set in your ways. Lisa, she said we should start fresh. And you believed her." I asked. He swallowed. I thought she was right. I didn't know how far it would go. I could see grief in his face, but I also saw the brittle edge of anger and the dull glow of shame. There are moments when forgiveness is immediate and moments when it has to be earned. I wasn't ready to forgive with the flick of a switch. Was I cruel? Perhaps. But when someone erases your life step by step and expects gratitude, some lessons must be stern. Over the next week, the legal wheels turned. Lisa and Patricia moved into a small rental 2 towns over. Daniel took a part-time job delivering packages and slept on a futon at a friend's apartment. Word spread through the neighborhood. People I'd known for decades came by with casseroles and sympathetic looks. "You handled it the right way," they told me. "You kept calm." That steadiness mattered. It kept the narrative from devolving into chaos. It showed the community that I had not been the one to start the trouble. but the real satisfaction came from the subtler moves. I made sure their presence in town felt different. I called the homeowners association to report that the house had been left behaviorally neglected, trash in the yard, loud music late at night, when in truth I had arranged for the yard to be tended and the garbage cleared. I wanted to preempt sympathy. I wanted neighbors to see them as transient trouble, not victims. When Patricia tried to threaten legal action, Thomas had a way of deflating her bravado. He produced documents, receipts, and a log of communications showing their transient status and my unassailable ownership. Faced with a mountain of evidence, she retreated into blusters and thin threats that never materialized. One evening, about a month after the eviction, I was invited to a small neighborhood barbecue. I went, of course, in a neat shirt, not to flaunt anything, but to live. As I stood by the grill, people came up and patted my shoulder. A neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, whispered, "I'm sorry you had to go through that. Henry, you should have seen their faces when they realized they didn't own a thing." That line, "you should have seen their faces when," had become a small, private triumph. It was not about cruelty. It was about truth. They had tried to rewrite the map of my life, and I had carefully returned each line to its rightful place. Did I feel vindictive? Sometimes. Mostly, I felt relieved. The house felt like mine again, but different. The rooms held an echo of the battle we'd fought. I walked through the halls and picked up a photograph of Margaret at the lake in 1989. Laughing, I set it back on the mantel and whispered, "We did it." The chest tightened and then eased. Justice, I learned, is a slow, methodical thing when done right. And as for Daniel, he called twice that month. I didn't answer the first time. The second call, I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, voice cracking, "Dad, I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I listened, then deleted it. Some conversations require time. Some apologies need proof. For now, the house was mine and that was enough. Time will tell if Daniel truly repents, but I have learned to protect what matters, my dignity, my home, and the memory of Margaret, for now. And always, the house was quiet again, not the kind of heavy silence that had settled in after Margaret's death. This was different. This was a clean, open, quiet, no footsteps that weren't mine, no whispered plotting in the kitchen, no perfume that didn't belong. It felt like breathing properly for the first time in months. The day Lisa and Patricia finally drove away with their last boxers, I stood by the window and watched them. Patricia was still on the phone, waving her arms like a general retreating from a lost battle. Lisa's lips were pressed tight, her eyes red from crying. Daniel stood a few meters behind them, shoulders slumped. He didn't look at me as they left, and maybe that hurt most of all. For weeks afterward, I stuck to the same quiet routine: morning coffee on the porch, roses, a walk down Maple Lane. Neighbors stopped me more often now. "You did the right thing, Henry," they'd say, shaking their heads. "She was a nightmare." Or, "It's your house, never forget that." At first, their sympathy stung, but over time, it started to feel like a strange kind of healing. The first night alone, I walked into the master bedroom and just stood there. The air was cool, the bed exactly as I'd left it. No boxes, no perfume, no Patricia, just the room Margaret and I had built together. I lay down and stared at the ceiling fan spinning softly. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own home. I slept like a man who'd finally shut a door that should have never been opened. Daniel didn't call for 10 days after the eviction. When he finally did, it was late at night, and I let the phone ring out. Not out of cruelty, I just wasn't ready. When your own son sides with people who treat you like a burden, something inside shifts. Love doesn't disappear, but trust does. And trust takes time to rebuild. 2 weeks later, he showed up unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. For a moment, it felt like seeing the boy he used to be. "Hey," he said quietly. I didn't reply. I just stepped aside. He entered slowly, his shoes echoing on the hardwood, like he was afraid to break something. "This place feels different," he murmured. "It feels like home again," I answered simply. He nodded, staring at the floor. "Lisa's staying with her mom. They're figuring things out." I didn't ask him to explain. I already knew. Patricia's empire had crumbled the moment the sheriff handed her that notice. "I wanted to say sorry," he said finally. His voice cracked a little. "I should have stood up for you. I should have stopped them." I crossed my arms. "Why didn't you?" He didn't have an answer. He just shook his head. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought she'd change if I gave her what she wanted." And what about me, Daniel? My voice came out quieter than I expected. What did I want? He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the shame, not the guilty kind you throw around when you get caught, but the real kind, the kind that weighs on you when you finally understand what you've done. I messed up, he said softly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't want to lose you. I studied him for a long moment. This was my son, the boy who once held my hand crossing the street, the man who let two women push him into betraying me. The line between those two people felt painfully thin. I don't hate you, Daniel, I said finally, but you broke something, and it's going to take time to fix. He nodded. He didn't ask to move back in, maybe because he already knew the answer. Over the next few months, the house began to breathe again. I repainted the living room. I put Margaret's ceramic jars back where they belonged. I replanted the rose garden with fresh soil and stood under the porch light at night, letting the quiet settle around me like an old friend. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming what should have never been taken. Lisa never called. Patricia sent one text, a rambling string of insults and self-pity, and I deleted it without replying. Daniel called every week, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to sit in silence on the phone. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. One afternoon, he asked, "Dad, do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" I said, not giving them another chance. I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally, "because a home isn't just walls, Daniel. It's respect. It's trust. And once that's gone, the walls don't mean anything." He nodded slowly. I could hear the weight of that settling in him. I didn't rebuild my relationship with Daniel overnight. I didn't invite him back with open arms, but I left the door open a crack, just wide enough for honesty, if he chose it. And that, I decided, was enough. The house, meanwhile, became something more than a structure again. It became mine. Margaret's laughter was no longer drowned out by Patricia's voice. My chair was my chair. My kitchen smelled like my coffee. Every corner whispered, "You held your ground." And deep down, I knew this. They hadn't just underestimated my rights, they had underestimated me. Looking back now, I realized this was never just about walls, furniture, or a piece of land. It was about dignity, about respect, about drawing a line and saying, "This far and no further." For months, I let things slide. I bit my tongue for the sake of family harmony, just like Margaret would have wanted. But family harmony doesn't mean becoming invisible in your own life. I gave them kindness, and they took it as weakness. Patricia thought she could manipulate me. Lisa believed her sweetness would let her claim what wasn't hers. And Daniel, my own son, thought silence was safer than standing up for what was right. But the truth is, silence can be just as loud as betrayal. The day I served those eviction papers, I didn't do it out of hate. I did it out of this house carries more than memories. It carries a lifetime of hard work, love, and sacrifice. I owed it to Margaret, and I owed it to myself. The weeks after were quiet, peaceful. I found pieces of myself I hadn't felt in years. I started fixing the porch swing again, repainting the living room, and making the house feel alive, my way. And though Daniel's betrayal cut deep, it also forced me to see something clearly. Blood may be thick, but self-respect is not negotiable. Neil and I are still talking, slowly, carefully. Maybe one day I'll trust him the way I once did. Maybe not, but at least now, it will be on honest terms, not on the shaky ground that Patricia and Lisa built. As for Lisa and her mother, their chapter in this house is closed for good. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's this. Never let anyone, not even family, make you feel like a guest in your own life. Stand your ground, even if your voice shakes. Because one day, you'll look back and thank yourself for not walking away quietly. What about you? If someone tried to take what was rightfully yours, what would you do? Think about it. And if my story spoke to you, don't forget to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them.